보도에 나와 있는 시민들뿐만 아니라 그 뒤 아파트에 사시는 분들까지도 그렇게 아주 열렬히 환영해 주시니까 정말로 뭐 아주 가슴이 벅찼습니다. 가슴이 그래서 정말 뭐
우리가 앞으로 우리 이민들, 북과 남의 이민들 마음 기대를 잊지 말고 온 교회에 그 기대를 잊지 말고 우리가 더 빠른 걸음으로 더 큰 성과를 내야 되겠구나 하는 그런 생각을 가졌습니다.
판문점의 봄이 우리 평양의 가을로 이렇게 이제 이어졌으니 이제는 이제 정말로 좀 결실을 풍성하게 맺을 때입니다.
우리는 분단의 비극을 한시라도 빨리 끝장내고 결의의 가슴속에 쌓인 분열의 한과 상처를 조금이나마 가실 수 있게 하기 위하여 평화와 번영으로 나가는 성스러운 여정에 언제나 지금처럼 두 손을 굳게 잡고 앞장에 서서 함께해 나갈 것입니다.
전쟁 없는 한반도가 시작되었습니다. 남과 북은 오늘 한반도 전 지역에서 전쟁을 일으킬 수 있는 모든 위험을 없애기로 합의했습니다. 우리는 5,000년을 함께 살고 70년을 헤어져 살았습니다. 나는 오늘 이 자리에서 지난 70년 적대를 완전히 청산하고 다시 하나가 되기 위한 평화의 큰 걸음을 내딛자고 제안합니다.
Hello and welcome to the program. Spring in Panmunjom has now turned to autumn in Pyongyang. South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un have sat down for their third Inter-Korean Summit of the year to discuss denuclearization and inter-Korean exchanges in depth. Today we'll discuss the details of that summit as well as the joint declaration signed by the two Koreas. For today's discussion, we're joined by Dr. James Kim of the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And to my left, Young-Joon, Managing Partner of Milbank's Seoul office. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Now to start, the Pyongyang summit was actually the third time a South Korean president has visited Pyongyang. So how would you rate the kind of treatment that President Moon received from North Korea? Because it was a very lavish welcome from the North Koreans and also the leader of North Korea as well.
Right, so it's the first summit for Kim Jong-un. So it held many meanings, I think. Because he wants to make his mark. And this is not just to show the world, but it's also to show his own people about how he carries himself and how he interacts with other leaders. And so it was a very important event for Kim Jong-un. And he also had a lot to gain from this. And he needed the event to be a success. For President Moon, I think there were a lot of differences with other summits that we've had in 2000 and 2007 with Kim Jong-il, right? There were, first of all, parts of the summit event were live. There were the summit itself and the meetings occurred at the Workers' Party building, which wasn't accessible before. Overall, I think the president got to experience not only Pyongyang, he also got to get outside of Pyongyang and go to Mount Baekdu, right? So that was also somewhat significant and, you know, unprecedented in many ways. So overall, I think President Moon was very happy with the reception that he got. And we got to see North Korea somewhat unfiltered. It was interesting that Kim Jong-un was willing to open up not only the country, but himself to the public as a sort of an average person, not as a sort of a deity or somebody who's deified in North Korea. So overall, I think there were a lot of interesting aspects of the summit, and President Moon should be happy with the reception that he got, and we got to learn a lot more about Kim Jong-un and North Korea.
Exactly, and like you said, there were a lot of groundbreaking firsts for this set of Inter-Korean summit. Now, Mr. Kim, I believe you visited Pyongyang actually back in 2011 at the invitation of North Korea's foreign ministry. Were you able to land at the Pyongyang International Airport? Because we had a lot of live footage from that airport, and we want to know if it looked the same back then a couple of years ago.
It is absolutely the same location, but it looks like a totally different airport. So we arrived at the Pyongyang airport, but the building and the infrastructure has completely transformed the last few years. It's pretty remarkable. And, but I want to caution that the physical change, particularly in an absolutely authoritarian regime, it's relatively easy to mobilize resources and labor to build something physically. But I think we should be mindful of possibly overreading the physical change into actually a system change or software change, because that's really the difficult part. But having said that, the transformation is pretty remarkable. And again, point is not every authoritarian regime can actually mobilize resources and labor to that efficiency. So, so cautiously optimistic, there are true significant changes being made there.
And Dr. Kim just previously mentioned it, but President Moon was able to visit Mount Paektu this time for his visit to Pyongyang, to North Korea. What is the significance of this? Would you say it's a very important step in inter-Korean relations, and how much affection North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has for his South Korean counterparts?
Yeah, as we all know, I mean, Paektusan means a lot emotionally to both North Koreans and South Koreans. You know, we were just Koreans before the division. So people outside the Korean Peninsula probably would not understand the significance of Paektu Mountain, but it really makes an emotional declaration. We are in this together. Let's do something together for our own joint mutual benefit. So it is a very symbolic step, but very important kind of a meeting of the minds as to the will to make some progress.
I see. Now, the previous visits by South Korean president were back in 2000 and 2007, like you mentioned, but they were under the Kim Jong-il regime. How would you say that Kim Jong-un's maybe diplomatic style or leadership is different from that of his father's?
Definitely, I think the key word here that differentiates Kim Jong-un from Kim Jong-il is open. So he's more open. He's willing to not only reveal his personal side, by bringing his wife out in the open and having some event for the First Lady as well. But he's also willing to go live on national television and let people hear what he's saying when he's talking to President Moon. And he just sounds like just another average guy, average guy that you can probably in some ways identify with his demeanor. But clearly, as Mr. Kim pointed out earlier, we need to be mindful of who this is and what kind of regime this is. So sometimes you had to kind of struggle to remind yourself that Kim Jong-un is not really, well, there's Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, and then there's Kim Jong-un, the person. So we got to see the personal side of him at this summit. And it seems that he's more confident than his father in that regard because he's willing to take that step. We also hear that he's not afraid to be a little adventurous. We've heard that he flies his own plane and lands them as well. Right. So in many ways, he's a little different than his father, a little bit more adventurous. I think that the Western education might have rubbed off on him about how he should carry himself and how he should interact with the world. So he's clearly a different kind of a leader than his father.
Yes, it's very evident from the footages that we see and the kind of moves that North Korea is making toward the international society and also South Korea. Now, I want to move on and maybe assess the results of the Inter-Korean summits. Dr. Kim, how would you rate the Inter-Korean summit's outcome, the Pyongyang declaration? Was it to your expectations or was it more, maybe less?
Somewhat mixed, because there was so much hype about denuclearization leading into the talks. And we expected something that is going to be earth-shattering. So we were hoping for something that really wasn't going to be delivered anyways. But there was a lot of expectation on the one hand by at least half the population that we're going to get some movement there. We did get some movement, but it wasn't the kind of movement that a lot of these optimists sort of predicted. We had some very specific, on the one hand, it didn't completely meet the high expectations. But on the other hand, there were some gains on the denuclearization side. For instance, there were specific mentioning of specific sites. For instance, the Yongbyon facility. And the Dongchangli facility doesn't relate directly to the nuclear program, but to the ICBM program and the missile development. And that's a concern for the United States. And the U.S. Could potentially see that as a huge development. And I think that the recent announcement by Secretary Pompeo that this is a really good step towards reestablishing talks on denuclearization, and for him to invite his counterpart for a meeting at the UN. I think these are all good signs that show that we had, at least a forward progress on these issues. But clearly on the nuclear issue, we didn't get the U.S. demands, namely a complete list of the inventory, which then the U.S. can check with its own intelligence to see whether or not it matches what the U.S. knows about the North Korean nuclear program. That would have been a really good litmus test to see whether or not North Korea is really serious about denuclearization. And clearly what the agreement seems to show is that North Korea is not willing to play the game the way the U.S. wants to on that issue. So on denuclearization, some mixed results. On the other side, about confidence building and on establishing a peace regime of some kind, I think there was a lot of progress on the military side. There was also some significant progress on cultural exchanges, people-to-people exchanges, and a potential for economic cooperation in the long run if we get some meaningful progress on denuclearization.
Now, some people actually say that the Pyongyang Declaration is kind of a step back from the previous summits because, speaking of the Yongbyon nuclear complex, it's actually demanding that it will need corresponding moves from the United States in order to make maybe destabilize, decompose that facility, right? So would you say that it's a progress forward or progress back from that aspect? So
that the second section of Article 5 in the joint statement where I think the Yongbyon facility is mentioned, it's even more ambiguous. Mm-hmm. So if the U.S. takes the corresponding measures, then we may consider the closure of Yongbyon facility. So there are a lot of conditions there. First, U.S. has to do something, and it's not clear at all from that statement what that is. Would it end with the war declaration, or is there something more on top of that? And then, depending on what U.S. does, they may consider. And once they've considered, then there might be other conditions attached to following through on that consideration. So we have a lot of steps here, and so there's rightful reason to be frustrated, but clearly there's a target here. They didn't mention, oh, we'll give you some kind of a list, or we'll move forward on denuclearization. That would have been even more ambiguous. Instead, there was a specific site that was mentioned. And here's Kim Jong-un essentially throwing out there and showing President Trump what he's willing to put on the table, and that's his bargaining chip. And President Trump has to come and either match that or talks her off, right? Or something else. We clearly have a long process into this, and it's not going to end with one summit, or even two for that matter, between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump. So on the one hand, I think we have to be fair to both the administration here, Moon administration and North Korea, for making due diligent effort. And the response from the U.S. has largely been positive so far. So let's see, given that the talks are back on, where we go from here. But again, we haven't seen any material progress. And if that's the measure by which we test whether or not this was a success, clearly we haven't gotten much there.
And Mr. Kim, I'd like to ask the same question. How would you evaluate the Pyongyang Declaration?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Kim's initial assessment about the sort of what's on the surface. On the surface, it seems almost like a step backward because the reason for the stalemate since the June summit and now has been kind of left unsaid. It's your move, it's my move, your move, my move. What do I need to do? What do you need to do? But it's been speculated as to which side needs to do what. Now it's almost formalized that next step is really the United States. The ball has been formally tossed back to the U.S. court, which in a narrow sense is a step backwards because instead of being left unsaid and continue to pressure North to make the first move, now they officially said, well, it's the U.S. turn to make a move, which I think is a step back. Having said that, there's some, a desire for progress. At least they made a chess move, so somebody needs to make the next move. In terms of the next steps, I'm a lawyer, so I cannot help being speaking like a lawyer. When you negotiate a contract, there are two types of undertaking. One is affirmative undertaking, the other is a negative undertaking. What I mean by that is affirmative undertaking is I am agreeing to do certain things. That means you can verify those steps, whether you have done that as according to the contract. Negative undertaking is I will not do certain things. And so far, the North Korean declaration has all about negative undertaking. The problem with negative undertaking is you can change your mind in a nanosecond, and there's nothing to verify. It's just your blind faith in the person's agreement not to do things. So everything has been, we will not test, we will not rebuild, we will destroy. So what the United States keeps asking because of frustration on this part is we need the affirmative undertaking. What that means is starting with the list of what they think is a submission of inventory, and that needs to be internationally verified by IAEA and others. And then you go to the next step of have they done certain things. So all of these things are affirmative undertakings. International agreements and treaties are all about affirmative steps and verification of those steps, not about enunciation of a will not to do certain things. So that's where the problem is.
I see. Now, the two Koreas also agreed on some economic aspects of inter-Korean relations, mainly the railroad connections, and also they said they would reopen the Kaesong Industrial Complex and also restart the tours at Mount Kumgang. Would you say that these things are possible within the near future because we still have the economic sanctions placed by the U.S. and the international community?
Yeah, so I think the difference between domestic law and international law is of course, violation of international sanctions is by definition international law because international sanctions is part of international law. But the difference is in the enforcement. Domestic law violation is enforced by the police and various judiciary and other law enforcement arms. International law is enforced by the perceived aggrieved party, and it really depends on the perceived aggrieved party's political will and strategic importance of enforcement. And also the current or likely state of affairs that led to the sanctions in the first place. All of those things go into the calculus of do we really enforce or sort of look the other way. That's why the sanctions sometimes seem very frustrating because it's not a domestic police enforcement, it's an international political enforcement. That's why sometimes you loosen it, sometimes you tighten it. So because of the post-summit, the June summit, Trump's declaration, there's no nuclear threat in Korean Peninsula anymore. China and Russia immediately picked up the signal, okay, we can trade with North. So that's what happened. And then Nikki Haley was screaming about that because that's because her boss basically said there's no nuclear threat in the Korean Peninsula. So in terms of economic engagement, I think it serves two purposes. One is for the South Korean business leaders to be there. Seeing is believing. They need to physically see what the opportunities are, what they hear from the North Korean parties, so that they can kind of realize what they need to do to improve the economic relations, and also as a businessman take advantage of opportunities. Number two, it shows the international community the possibilities of the fruits of economic engagement by having these major tribal leaders to be in North Korea physically. So it has a lot of symbolic sense. Also, I think thirdly, maybe vicariously, it sends a message to potential domestic disgruntled groups who might not be so enamored about this opening by Kim Jong-un. Look, these are for real, and this can benefit all of us. So I think those are the three purposes of having the leaders, even though as long as there's sanctions, there aren't any immediate steps that can be taken advantage.
I see. Now, Dr. Kim, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I was going to add, there's also the fourth factor. And we saw that in June with when President Trump came with a little iPad to show Kim Jong-un a video that he made of what would happen on their denuclearized Korean Peninsula. And President Moon didn't create another video like President Trump and brought an iPad with him, but or a Samsung notepad or whatever.
Yeah, USB.
Right. Instead, he just brought the stakeholders and showed them, I think he showed North Korea that if you are willing to move forward on denuclearization in meaningful ways, then we have all these players here who's willing to play, who's willing to invest. And you can talk about the possibilities. You can hear from them what they have to offer. Or you might make some offers about what you think would be great, you know, something great to do for Samsung or LG or Hyundai in North Korea. So I think this was a way to coax and cajole North Korea to move forward on denuclearization in meaningful ways, along with all the other things that Mr. Kim just mentioned, which I think are all valid points on that. But again, going back, international sanctions without there being some kind of an exception to this, and in this case, I think United States would be a key player, given that most of the banks that would be involved in any financial transactions are doing business with banks in New York. U.S. would be in the pole position to say, hey, do you want to continue to do business with us in New York? Then you better follow through on the sanctions regime that we have in place, or else you're not going to have access. That's a huge threat to the banks, and that's what gets the banks a little riled up and sort of, you know, take a step backwards. Now, so on anything involving financial transactions, there are challenges associated with that because of the sanctions. If there's a way for South Korea and North Korea to engage in some sort of cooperation without there being any involvement of financial transactions, the potential solutions might arise, but I just don't see how that's ever possible with the kind of infrastructure projects we're talking about, with the amount of capital that you would need to make that happen. So it's a huge challenge. But we saw, for instance, you know, in Kaesong, that liaison office being opened.
Yes, it was done.
Right, it was done, right? So again, how the Korean government will go about doing that, and how, what kind of, and it all depends on how the talks go from here on out. Between North Korea and the United States, as well as between President Moon and President Trump.
Now, that will really depend on the upcoming events after the Inter-Korean Summit, mainly the UN General Assembly and also the planned meeting between Presidents Trump and Moon. Where do you think the denuclearization talks will go from here? Could you start, Mr. Kim?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Secretary of State Pompeo put out a press statement right after the joint declaration, which talked about not only nuclear, but actually he used the words, I'm quoting it, negotiations transforming the U.S.-DPRK relations, which is quite broader than just the denuclearization talk. So there are speculations as to whether, does that mean partly starting some sort of a path to normalization relations beyond nuclear? So, but again, you have to read this with some sort of skepticism, because Trump needs to demonstrate before the midterm elections coming up in 5-6 weeks that there are real progress, as opposed to kind of Dutch summit of June. So they'll try to do everything to make it sort of some material improvement. Having said that, next week is a key. President Moon has a huge job selling this package, whatever it is, to Trump, because the key is, from the international community's point of view, 95% of what's in the joint declaration, the international community doesn't care about. Who cares about the Korean Peninsula contagious disease cooperation and environmental protection of the DMZ and cultural exchange of K-pop and joint pursuit of Olympic hosting? The international community doesn't care about that. The 5% they care about is on the page 4 of the joint declaration, the Article 5, regarding the denuclearization.
And Dr. Kim, do you agree with what Mr. Kim had to say?
I think Mr. Kim nailed it on the head. Basically, I think some of the scenarios that a lot of people talked about several months back when the first summit was happening in Panmunjom, and then post-Singapore summit, you know, the label that was being floated around, the flavor of the month in Washington and Seoul was catastrophic success. And, you know, you might want to say, is that catastrophic success, or is that peace without denuclearization? Is that where we're headed? Clearly, if you take a look at the joint statement as it's stated, there's a lot of emphasis on peace part. And there's a de-emphasis, a lack of emphasis on denuclearization, as Mr. Kim pointed out. You know, there's genuine concern here whether this issue will ever get tackled in the way that the international community wants it to be tackled. But at the same time, we need to be mindful that this is a part of the process, right? It's a shot in the whole process, and the process is likely to be longer given what we see. Are we going to see something, a happy ending with the denuclearized Korean Peninsula at the end of this story? Well, I'm not sure. And frankly, I think the odds are against it, given the data points that we have from the past. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here. And I think Kim Jong-un, President Trump, and President Moon shouldn't underestimate the challenges that lie ahead. And there's, you know, and we need to wait and see and be vigilant that this issue gets tackled the way the international community wants it to be tackled.
Well, hopefully some of that will wrap up before North Korean leader Kim Jong-un makes his visit to Seoul within the end of this year. I think that will also be a very important, a key event, a groundbreaking event for the two Koreas this year. Well, I think we'll wrap up today's discussion here. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now that the Pyongyang summit has come to a close, it's now Washington's turn to respond. Will the key message sent by the two Koreas reach the United States and bring it back to the negotiating table? Hopefully, we'll find out soon. Well, this is all we have for you today. We'll be back next week. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.